So as we continue with the complexity of perspective drawing, um, we're going to continue to sort of figure out how to best use things like vanishing points and horizons and how to draw without those in case they're too crazy to try to figure out. And in general, how I and many other artists start out so much of drawing with trying to simplify things into whatever the biggest, most obvious three-dimensional form, three-dimensional structure is. And this is going to be, I'm going to do several little tutorials here, but I'm going to talk about how I would go about drawing something like this, why I would do it, and why I would consider this perspective drawing, and how it relates in some obvious and not obvious ways. But I'm also going to try to just keep it to some very general and foundational ideas of drawing and measuring and understanding shape and direction and all that sort of stuff. So that'll be fun. I am going to let's see, the original image I was using is this, and I am going to I have a version that is semi-transparent. I think I just tilted here, that's going to hopefully help identify some things. And I'm not sure, I may sort of try to do, I think it helps to just have to know how to approach any of these things in general, and make sure you understand that before worrying about the specifics of a given one, because you can spend so much time trying to make sure that you are drawing the exact angles, just like the whatever it is you're looking at and wanting to replicate. But I would argue there's even more important sort of foundational things to make sure you're thinking of even before you do that. So yeah, I just made up my mind. I'm gonna start with just sort of a general idea of when I'm drawing anything and breaking it into a box or blocky structure, which, like you've probably heard me say, is pretty much anything that's man-made and women-made, human-made. But there's my cheat sheets. I'm a big fan of breaking things into always trying to find a simpler way of breaking things down, because even this has a huge number of subtle things going on that it's really hard to keep track of. So I believe in this phrase I use, fewer things better. I also like threes, as you may have noticed. There's 3 words in that. Interesting. But I'm going to focus, first of all, just on breaking something down like this into even smaller sort of sections, and specifically this plane, this one plane of this overall structure that's made up of, yes, 2 structures, but I'm thinking of the whole, and I'm thinking of this plane as what I'm looking at and trying to figure out right now. And like I said, I will be doing that with this, but I want to get some even more general thoughts down first. When I'm drawing anything like this, and I'm trying to break it down into the planes, it's very helpful to sketch in something, to really sort of look and think about what it is that I'm drawing. That may sound obvious, but even more, I'm drawing this face of something, and I know that that edge is as tall as this edge, but it appears smaller because it's further away in space. It doesn't appear much smaller, but it's critical that it is at least somewhat smaller. So one way to make sure that I'm going to do that, that's going to be something that ends up in my final drawing, is by literally measuring each of these verticals to make sure that, yes, indeed, this one is longer than this one. And depending on how close you're viewing something, depending on a couple different things, it'll be quite a bit smaller, or pretty much not much smaller at all. I want to make sure that I'm drawing these lines accurately in an up and down fashion. I want to make sure they're vertical. So I'm going to sort of measure over here and keep eyeballing and making sure this one looks like it is trying to lean that way a little. So I'll emphasize a little bit more and hopefully just straighten that up. So that's a critical thing about just drawing these vertical planes in general, is making sure I think about which is closer, which edge is closer, which is further, therefore which is longer, and which is shorter. Another thing that I'm going to use that is going to be extremely helpful is to isolate this this face, this plane. Actually, I'm going to use the other version. In terms of just two dimensions, the two-dimensional space area, you could say it takes up. So when thinking about this as an individual shape, looking at the highest point and the lowest point, and I'm talking about in a two-dimensional sense. So highest closest to the top of the paper and lowest closest to the bottom of the paper. And I want to think about these negative shapes, these little triangles. So if I was to do that with this sort of general, actually it's looking fairly similar to the photograph, but not exactly. I want to make sure that I understand the entire rectangle that this vertical plane occupies. Hopefully this is not confusing, but I'm speaking all proportionally here. So I'm not trying to draw exactly that distance and this distance, but this is all in proportion, and hopefully that is sort of obvious, but I know it's not necessarily obvious. So once again, just sort of a general idea of how I would start. And to reiterate, I want to make sure that this distance here to here is greater than this distance here to here. What you're also probably noticing, is that this distance is greater. Can you do that? Than this one. So having a visual confirmation that this is longer than this is longer than this triangle is indeed bigger than this one, and this will be true when we're looking down on box-like structures, when we're our eye level is above them and we're looking down. So this will remain true. So something that you just really think about. And having something like that makes it that much easier to really kind of try to draw this particular vertical plane somewhat accurately. And I'm going to talk about a couple different strategies I would use to help with that. I've talked about my R7 JNL idea, or I think of letter forms and number forms in that case. I would also do the same thing for the outer just straight rectangle. I would think of, imagine that as a letter, lowercase r, that is a number 7, a J, and an L. I'm also going to imagine a couple additional things, and I'll talk about those in a second. But I'm going to just kind of get started. If I was to do something to draw this vertical plane, I would take this information that I jotted down, simplifying this shape even more, and I would begin to sketch that in. And really just thinking about how tall this seems compared to how wide that seems, and comparing it to something visually that I sort of have in my head and can hold on to for a little bit. And then if this was a number 7, it might be something sort of like that. And this, if this was a capital J, and I'm already sensing I want it to be a little bit wider. And I like the sort of going around, all the way around, and comparing each vertical to a horizontal. And by going the entire way around, I feel like it gives me more of a sporting chance of getting an accurate proportion. I think that's okay for now. I think it still might be a little bit, this one might be a little bit narrow, but I'm going to hold off on that, he said. Another thing to do is to imagine what the diagonal for that particular rectangle would be. And if I can compare that to this and compare the larger rectangles, excuse me, triangles, that will help me as well. And that sort of is kind of showing me that I do think that this particular kneaded eraser is pretty loved. Woo! Oh man. Note to self, start with a decent... Let's see if this works any better. From bad to worse. I'm going to keep going. This one down too. Professional production values here, folks. Not. So that has me sort of honing in on the proportions of that outer rectangle in a way that I'm a little bit more confident of. And now I'm going to think about this triangle. Man, I'm having trouble. And this triangle. And trying to just sort of match those both in a sense of the overall shape. Does this triangle look like this, and does this triangle look like that? Our eyes are pretty good at discerning subtle differences in triangles. And finally, I'm going to talk about, it's sort of, I don't know if it's a goofy or a really helpful idea, but it's sort of imagining abstract shapes as being some sort of object. Some sort of object that is a whole and complete thought in itself. And as I was just sort of brainstorming about a vertical plane like this, it occurred to me that this triangle and this vertical here was reminding me of just sort of a flag in a golf hole. I'm not a golfer, so you'll have to pardon me if that's really not like that at all, but just thinking about something like that can help think about whether this particular golf flag, there's a professional term, no. Either way, looks like that one, and somehow thinking of things as a whole like that can help you just sort of think, oh no, this one is obviously a skinnier flag, and it has a longer pole. And in a similar fashion, I could think of something abstract that this might be. And maybe I could think of that as a foot at the end of a leg or something. And like I say, something about that seems to sort of take my mind away from worrying about proportions and exact distances, etc. And it's, I don't know, something about it is just, oh yeah, it's a foot and a leg. and if it looked like that, I would know pretty quickly that obviously it's both different overall dimensions, but obviously proportionally it's a very different foot and a leg than that. All kinds of fun things like that. And I encourage you to make those up and to check it out, see if that actually helps you or not. Another thing I think of sometimes is a bird. If that's a bird head with a really long neck, maybe it's a flamingo or something. Or a giraffe. I don't know. You have fun with it. So I'm gonna pause there. This is sort of my introduction for the general idea for making sure I know generally how to be managing all these different vertical planes, and I'll get to this the one pointing, well, I would say pointing left in a way, facing. Never mind, this one. And get more into specifics for this particular thing. Okay,